And this is a scene here playing out in Minneapolis. This is part of the advanced police presence that we saw come over the course of really minutes when the local police showed up at the fire department, or with the fire department, I should say, on that building we showed you that was burning. This is among the State Patrol unit that was advancing up the street, saying and scattering the protesters at that point for people to clear the area. And so we walked away. I'm sorry?
You're under arrest.
Okay. Do you mind telling me why I'm under arrest, sir? Why am I under arrest, sir?
Officer's with CNN and he's on the air right now.
Okay.
You are arresting him live on CNN. We told you before that we are with CNN.
If you're just tuning in, you are watching our correspondent, Omar Jimenez, being arrested by state police in Minnesota.
A CNN reporter gets arrested on live television as leftists defend rioters destroying their own cities. In this video, we're going to take a look at the latest riots going on in Minneapolis, how leftist liberals are defending the violence, and how the CNN reporters' arrests and the destruction of their own cities are symbolic of how leftist liberalism is destroying itself. You're not going to want to miss this. Greetings, everyone. Dr. Steve here with you. Awesome to be with you as always. If this is your first time here at this channel, we post 2 videos a day analyzing current events and line some super awesome conservative trends so you can live in the present in light of even better things to come. So if you haven't already done so, make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. It'll be an absolute privilege to have you as a regular part of this channel where we daily have the privilege of celebrating together the inevitable collapse of left-wing globalism, and boy, are we going to see that today, and the unstoppable rise of a new conservative age. So let's begin with our video chat question of the day. Do you think that the mainstream media is at least partly fueling these riots? Let us know in the comments section below. With all of their rhetoric blatantly justifying the rioting and looting, do you think that the mainstream media is at least partly fueling these riots? Because we are going to explore that very question. And I think we'll find not only why the media seems so intent on justifying these riots, but also why in the end it only ends up boomeranging on themselves. But first, before you do anything else, make sure to click on that link below and head on over to my special website for My Patriot Food Supplies. We saw with the whole coronavirus crisis, we cannot wait for an emergency to happen before we respond to one. And no one makes preparing for an emergency more ridiculously easy and affordable than My Patriot Supply. Gang, they're simply the best. Their food kits last up to 25 years in storage. They include breakfasts, lunches, and dinners. And best of all, they have a guarantee policy that will knock your socks off. And if you act now, you can save $100 off a full 4-week emergency food supply when you click on the link below to my special website. You heard that right, 100 smackers off. So don't wait, click on that link below. Save $100 off your very own 4-week emergency food supply today. All right, let's dive right in here. As I'm sure you're all well aware of, riots have raged throughout Minneapolis and other American cities in response to the tragic death of George Floyd, a black man killed by a white police officer. Now, of course, we're still in the process of fact-gathering precisely what happened there, but all 4 police officers involved have been fired. And even President Trump, from what he's seen, thinks the officers were at fault and has no sympathy for them. But neither does Trump have a shred of sympathy for the rioters and the looters and the vandals that have used the tragedy as an excuse to start to burn down Minneapolis. However, it didn't take long for our political class to launch into a prolonged screed of cultural Marxist rhetoric that is currently justifying this rampant scourge of violence as a legitimate response to an inherently and perniciously racist society. The irony of this reporter getting arrested is that he's part of a supposed news organization that is expressing its overt solidarity with the rioters. Here's just a sample of this racial rhetoric coming from our mainstream media. Take a look.
Black people's right to protest is secondary to white people's right to be an armed protest with long guns, terrifying-looking war weapons.
This is how the protest of Floyd's death ended up. Police in riot gear flooding the streets with tear gas and shooting rubber bullets into the crowd. Another example of how this pandemic has been a kind of black light exposing all the inequalities in American life.
And that's the meme that's going around right now with the cops, with the black kid on the ground saying hello to the white guy in camo with the AK-47 and the mask who was protesting in Michigan. That when it's white people with guns and they're out and they're angry and they're faces with cops.
Didn't see any of that.
Everybody's civil.
It's human beings' natural inclination when they feel wrong, when they feel put upon, when they're living under oppressed conditions, is to lash out. And this is the history of the modern West. It's the history of the world in some ways. And so part of what we have to do is try to understand the context that led to what happened.
It is not incumbent upon black people to stop racism, to stop this. It is incumbent upon people who hold the power in this society to help to do that, to do the heavy lifting. And guess who that is? Who is that, Chris?
White people.
Now, what's essential to get here is that what you just heard in that montage is demonstrably cultural Marxist rhetoric. What you heard over and over again is what's called the power plus prejudice definition of race. All right, don't forget that. The power plus prejudice definition of race. This is the notion that non-white people cannot possibly be racist, since you need political power to be racist, and only white people in America ultimately hold political power. That's the power plus prejudice definition of racism. Forget the fact that racism is an extremely complicated phenomenon to actually define. The scholarly literature reflects that clearly. It is an extremely complicated issue, but not to Don Lemon and Chris Cuomo, who actually believe that, Chris Cuomo actually believes that calling an Italian Fredo is equivalent to the N-word. No, for them, it's completely simple. White people, by definition, are racist because they benefit from their race's hold on political power and privilege. And this Marxist conception, this cultural Marxist conception of the world, facts, actual facts don't matter. It doesn't matter to these leftist liberals that statistics demonstrate that whites and Hispanics are 3 times more likely to be shot and killed by police officers than blacks. In fact, police officers are actually at a higher risk of being shot by a black assailant than the other way around. According to FBI data, 40% of all cop killers were black, 2.5 times higher than the rate blacks are shot by police. These are facts. These are not interpretations. These are not opinions, subjective perceptions. This is what the data clearly shows. The data also shows that racism is an all-time low today. Here's but one example. When Americans were asked back in 1958 if they approved of interracial marriage, only 4% said yes. Today, the number of Americans who approve of interracial marriage is nearly 90%. And that's just one of a myriad of examples of how racism and racist sentiments have been on the decline for decades. But none of that matters. None of that matters. It's all deliberately ignored by a cultural Marxist media. But why, we have to ask. All we have to do is actually listen to them, listen to their rhetoric, to what they're actually saying. You see, cultural Marxists, by definition of their ideology, are committed to replacing any and all customs, cultures, and traditions that they now deem to be racist, bigoted, sexist, and homophobic. This is why cultural Marxism has a home in globalism. Globalism, by its nature, seeks to replace the old world order made up of nation, culture, custom, and tradition. And both globalism and cultural Marxism want to replace an old age with a new age. A new age governed by a political class of so-called experts who can engineer and micromanage the various societies of the world into a single one-size-fits-all political and economic system for their own benefit. But in order to replace societies, what do you have to do first? You have to destroy them. In order to replace, you have to rid. And that's when the rhetoric of these leftist liberals on CNN and MSNBC comes into such sharp focus, because you'll notice that montage of leftist liberals that you heard all demonstrated over and over again. If you can show that politically correct norms have been violated, then recourse to violence is justified. I'll say that again because I think it's absolutely essential for us to get here. Liberal rhetoric basically comes down to this. If politically correct norms have been violated, so we're talking acts of racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and the like, whatever it is, if politically correct norms have been violated, then violence in response to such a violation is absolutely justified. This is what we have to understand. Cultural Marxist leftist liberalism is inherently violent. If you or anyone transgress its norms, you can be threatened, hello Fredo, you could be canceled, you could be deplatformed, you could be censored, your business can be looted, your city can be burned down, and yes, you could be personally assaulted. This is precisely what Antifa embodies. Antifa is the justified violence of the left. And violence is justified on the left precisely because of their commitment to rid and replace. If older societies are going to be replaced by the rule of the woke social justice crowd, they first have to be rid. They have to be destroyed. This is why facts don't matter. Because facts don't necessarily aid in the ridding process, in the destruction process. If they do, well, then facts will be touted. But if they don't, then they're going to be ignored. They're going to be suppressed. The left has overtly admitted that they adhere to an inherently violent ideology. They've been outed, as it were. Or they've outed themselves. They outed themselves in that their own words testify to the fact that they as leftists, they as cultural Marxists, are indeed advocates of violence and destruction if politically correct norms have been violated. They are proponents of an inherently violent ideology. And I think this is vitally important for us to get, to understand, because I think it's going to be key to understanding their own self-destruction. Because what I see in that CNN reporter's arrest on the one hand and in watching rioters destroying their own cities on the other is a twofold symbol of leftist liberalism's own self-implosion, its own self-destruction. It is an inherently violent belief system that ends up ultimately destroying itself. Liberals, whether they realize it or not, don't destroy suburbia. They don't destroy rural areas. They don't destroy the vast stretches of counties in the South and Midwest, the so-called flyover country that they so detest, red America. No. In the name of their power plus prejudice definition of racism, in the name of fighting back against all of this supposed racial oppression, what does leftist liberal ideology ultimately destroy in the name of their justifications of violence? Last I looked, these aren't Republican cities burning to the ground. Leftist liberals end up destroying their own cities, their own neighborhoods, their own businesses. In supposedly trying to destroy racism, they only end up destroying themselves. Now, before you go, you will definitely want to check out my latest video on Trump's executive order against big tech and how Twitter's stock is already plummeting. You're going to absolutely love it, so make sure to click on the link, and I will see you over there. God bless.